Hi everybody, this is Spooky's Revenge, and we're back for episode 7 of our 5-year $500 series. And it is after October 1st, so we got our next contribution put into the account. That's going to be $500, so it's just a month after month after month thing. But I also had a garage sale this weekend. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today was additional contributions and side hustles. So you'll see a lot of times people are out there trying to pump up these small accounts, and they often, they do little side challenges here and there just to see how much money they can raise over the course of, a year or so. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to put it into something that will actually grow over time beyond just that 1 year. So I'm not going to do this every single month. I just want to do one this month and just put some of the proceeds from that sale into the portfolio just to demonstrate that it is possible and that can have a pretty significant impact long term. And then if you guys want to do it on your own, you can. But for this account, I'm going to try to stay just as consistent with that 500 as possible. But I did at least want to include one additional contribution early on, and I'll be doing them more frequently later on in the series. So it definitely adds up. So as you can see, let me get my face out of here. We have our 1,000 so far, so we are in the month of October. So let me go ahead and pull up that spreadsheet. So this is the spooky season contribution right here is $500. I haven't bought any new shares yet, but I will be. I want to grab at least one JEPQ. I want to grab one more Johnson & Johnson, and I'd like to grab 2 more of the Schwab ETF. But I'm also looking at TSLY, CLIP, and VIG. Now I asked a couple people which one between Schwab and VIG I should grab. The VIG is the Vanguard ETF, but definitely going to grab some Tesla just because it's a more aggressive dividend. It's benchmarked on Tesla, so it's a relatively new ETF, but it's pretty nice. So I'm going to add some of that into my account early on so we can get that more aggressive growth over time. It's also a monthly payment, so it's going to be a little bit more impactful early on, and then as the account grows a little more and as time goes by, then I'll focus more on building out those stable positions that have more reliable dividends. So I'm okay with taking a little bit of a risk here early on, but I don't believe that Tesla is really going to hurt us too much. So that brings me to the next point. I got to kind of get through this one a little quick because I got a couple things I got to do before the market opens. So one of the questions that I was asked over the weekend was, when do I feel comfortable averaging up on a dividend position? And that is pretty easy. The fact of the matter is we don't have to, right? If you're just buying it for growth potential, you don't really want to average up all the way up to the top, right? Because that's always the fear, is you keep averaging up, boom, 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 and then as soon as you get a nice high average, you've amassed a huge position, then the price falls off, right? We've all been burned by that, so we're going to avoid doing that if we're not comfortable with that growth potential. So the purpose of me buying these shares for the most part is going to be for the dividends. So I don't really care too much about where the price goes, but I will have to keep in mind that when I sell those shares, I will have a capital gain or I will have a capital loss, and that will affect my ability to either recoup some of that if it's a loss or introduce a tax burden on it if it's a profit. So either way, the majority of these I'm not going to sell unless I've held them for at least a year, because I want that long-term capital gains rate to be in effect. I don't want to have to pay 37% and have it taxed as regular income if I do have to sell. But another part that I think we should talk about is the cost basis for each of these shares. So when I buy a share of a ETF, a dividend stock, say like the Johnson & Johnson. Let's look at that one. If I'm looking at Johnson & Johnson, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up the stock analysis page for it, just so we can see the specifics of the dividend. And let me just go ahead and pull that over here. All right. So the current price is $155. I paid $163.85. So it has come down a little bit. It's almost 5% down. But I don't really care, right? I have 2 shares and I have an average of $163.85. If it's lower, I can always just buy more. But what's important to identify here is the cost basis. And for me right now, it's $163.85. It's a quarterly payment, so I haven't been paid yet. But when the dividend payment does come in, I'll be able to subtract that from my average, and that'll tell me my cost basis. So we can kind of look at these as like a loan. right, that we're giving to ourselves. So if I paid $163.85 per share and I'm getting a dividend of roughly $1, right, maybe $1, $1.20, and I assume that's going to grow over time based on the stability of the stock and the dividend growth, this will reduce the cost basis by this amount plus every single quarter. So I can kind of estimate how many quarters it will take me to basically get a free share just from the dividend payout alone. Now, that is a ridiculously long period of time, so I'm not too worried about that. But what I am going to focus on is the fact that every single quarter, so 4 times a year, I will receive 4 dividends. And those dividends will each reduce the cost basis per share, and anything beyond that is free. So when I get that cost basis below the initial average minus the potential average up, if I were to average up that distance right there, I would just need to make sure that that's covered by dividend payments if that's my strategy and I'm okay averaging up. Otherwise, I don't really care what happens because I'm just in it for the dividends. I don't really care too much about the P&L until it's time to sell. Now, I can always lock them in if it's a higher up price and I don't want to add more. I can always just reduce my position too if I'm worried about downside risk. Once I get the bigger positions rolling where they're 100 plus shares each, then we can do things like covered calls and sell options contracts against them. And then that way, if the contract gets assigned, if the buyer of the contract wants the shares, I'll get paid anyway at a higher strike price. So there's a guaranteed lock profit there. Or it will expire worthless, or they just won't want the contract to be fulfilled. So I'll just keep their premium, which I get anyway, as well as my shares. So I don't have to worry about that too much because there's a bunch of strategies we can put in place. So it all just boils down to a matter of personal comfort. If you are comfortable averaging up and you have a strategy in place to offset that cost basis, whether it's through dividend harvesting, through an option strategy like covered calls, or if you want to do some other strategy, anything you can do to offset that cost basis, that will widen that gap of, how far up you can average without necessarily taking a negative result, right? So it's important just to understand all that and give each position its due diligence and figure out whether or not you're holding it for dividends, passive growth, or some other purpose, okay? Okay, now the one thing that I think I really, really, really want to harp on is that it's okay to take smaller losses. And even if those losses get pretty quote unquote big, everyone has a different set of risk tolerances. And what I want to do is just walk through each loss, right? I want to just follow a dollar through a loss as soon as this ever loads. And you'll see that if you play your cards right, you get a literal refund on your realized losses at tax time. And then you can recycle that back in your portfolio and then just buy more dividends with it. So you're not really losing as long as you do it the right way and you respect the limits that are in place. For me personally, I'm an individual and I'll be filing independent, so I will get up to $3,000. If I was married, it might drop down to $1,500 maximum claimable losses. I'm not sure what's going on with my diagram here, but sorry, I might just not have a visual for this one. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to edit these, so I'll try it one more time, but I'll just walk through it as I go. So if I sell Johnson & Johnson right here and realize the $16.82 loss, okay? Now that means that when it's tax time, I can claim that as long as I don't re-enter that same position or a substantially similar position within the 30-day window. All right, and that's a wash sale rule requirement. So I don't want the IRS to say, oh, I can't use that anymore because I'm doing something shady. So, all right, so here we go. So as long as you don't violate the wash sale rule, you get 100% of those losses back up to that limit. So those are the kind of the boundaries we have to play within. So as long as you do that, you're okay. Once you get the taxes, once you get the losses claimed on the taxes, you can claim up to $3,000. And this is not financial advice. Always seek the guidance of a locally licensed tax professional. But up to $3,000 of those losses can be applied to your capital gains, which means you get a 100% return on those for your tax burden. Okay. And this is important because it might not seem like a direct refund. If that reduced burden offsets another credit or deduction that you've claimed, that would normally be paid into this tax burden, that is a refund. So that's awesome. It contributes to your refund at the end of the year. It's not just something that you offset a tax burden on. It definitely carries into credits and deductions once you exceed that, above zero limit. All right. And then once you've applied them to your capital gains, you can also claim another amount. In my case, again, it's $3,000 per year maximum towards your salary and income. So this also applies to dividends, because those are taxed as ordinary dividends, because those are taxed as income. So that's a pretty good advantage to have. So you're kind of offsetting everything for the first couple of years, right? You don't really have to worry too much about it as long as you don't exceed those limits or violate the wash sale rule. So let's just say that I've got a $5,000 shuffle, right? I've got some amount in losses, some amount in profits. I'm coming up with a roughly, $2,000 plus. Okay, so I've offset my losses, and I've got a $2,000 deduction basically, which applies to my, these two combined. Okay. Now, if I'm claiming deductions for my business and I'm claiming, charitable contributions up to $500, and I'm claiming this and I'm claiming that, and I'm getting all these credits, business deductions, all that good stuff. All of this income burden and capital gains tax burden, those would normally take away from those deductions, because portions of that would need to be deducted from the refund and applied to these tax burdens. So since we're wiping that out, essentially, we're refunding it, you get to keep more of those deductions that are legitimate that you're writing off for other things. So it might be a little bit hard to bridge the gap between saying, oh, this is just offsetting taxes and this is actually applying to my refund. So as long as you can do those two correctly, you will literally get a refund on most, if not all, of the dollars that you claim as losses in your trades. So as long as you keep your losses below 3K or below 6K or whatever applies to you individually, you literally get that back at the end of the year. And the important part is, once you get your tax refund, if you take a portion of that and put it back in your portfolio, you're just recycling the same dollars. So you don't really take losses as long as you stay small and within those reasonable limits. And you just get another attempt on that same dollar, those same exact dollars, to try to trade again. Or you can just reinvest them into dividends. Now, if you're taking 70% of your contributions and applying them to investments and dividends and passive growth, that means that 70% of your dollars that you're putting back in, that you've already taken losses on, gotten a full refund, and you're putting it back in, will go straight into investments. So it's almost like you never really took those losses at all on that 70%. You just fast forwarded a little bit and then shifted them into investments instead of tried to trade with them. So you took a shot at it. In the speculative trading, you took your losses, and now they're just parked in investments. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit complex, but once you get that figured out, it takes so much more stress out of the equation, just because you don't really care too much about, having to get every single trade right, or having to, be a master technical analyst. You just get it back as long as you don't impulsively trade too much and keep re-entering and all that good stuff. And that's why I oscillate between SPX and SPY. So I traded SPX last month towards the middle of the month, middle to the end of the month. I took a $40 loss on that. So at tax time, I'm getting that back, and then I'm going to put it right back in to my portfolio. And if I get, say, a $2,000 refund, for example, that's 4 extra months worth of contributions. That's an extra third of the year that I'm adding to my timetable without moving the deadline on this 5-year challenge. Okay. So everything we can do to optimize that tax refund helps. Okay. And this is kind of why I wanted to talk about the side hustle stuff, because if you've got, old clothing, for example, you can bring that to a registered charity in most cases, like a Goodwill. You can donate them. They can assess the value and all that stuff, but they give you a receipt for fair market value for your items. And I believe up for clothing, I think it's up to $500 per year. But they give you that receipt, and then you can claim that on your taxes. So don't throw away your clothes or other stuff you have lying around. You can donate that stuff and get a cash value from it. So that's what we're doing with some of the stuff that just didn't sell at the garage sale. The rest of it's cash. It's just going in here, and then I'm going to buy some more in the investment side, because I really want to speed up that compound growth as early as possible, because that's where the power is. So I'm going to go ahead and spend some time and deliberate which shares specifically I want to buy. I really do like, obviously, Johnson & Johnson and JPQ, and I like Tesla, but I also like SCHD. So those I'm definitely going to focus on. I may grab a small position in, sorry about that, may grab a small position in Clip, and I'm really contemplating VIG, but I believe I'll do that later on. I was thinking maybe December or January. Only because I think that one's a little bit more expensive. Let me just go ahead and double check that. It's one of the Vanguard ones, so they're usually pretty, yeah. It's about the same price as Johnson & Johnson, so there's no reason to like jump into that necessarily, and it's got a lower dividend yield. So it's got a higher dividend growth, though. That's why I'm kind of interested in it after the year. I don't really want to jump in too early, but it's nice. It's also a quarterly payout, so I don't have to worry too much about getting in before the X date and all that good stuff. So all right, I'm going to end this recording. I appreciate you guys all watching, and if you guys have any questions, please let me know. I will be going over things a little bit more in depth going forward. I know a lot of this has just been about, dividend this, dividend that, tax refund this, tax burden this, claiming this, claiming that. But it's really important to understand those concepts early on, because that's when most people make their mistakes, and they just, they get too aggressive, and things like SPY 0 days, for example, tend to get in the way, and then you end up revenge trading, trying to make it back. And what you're doing every time you re-enter after you take a loss is, again, you're sacrificing that tax advantage. So rather than doing that blindly, I'd rather teach you what you don't know early, so that at least you can slow down and be patient and be consistent. And all the cool stuff will come in time. But for right now, I just wanted to show you guys, there are several cards in your hand that you can play. You just have to know what they are and when the best time to play them is. So I'm going to update this spreadsheet right here because I'm adding 200 to it. So it's still the base 500, but additional money from the quote unquote side hustle. So, and you can see that's increased the compound contributions over time. Instead of 30.5, it's 30.7. So if I do this, something, once a month, even if it's only a little bit, it still adds up and affects this number, which ultimately affects the exponential aspect of the dividends and passive growth. So I will see you guys all next episode. I appreciate it, and I'll see you later.